that. But today's topic is going to be talking about four big, beautiful opportunities for church generosity. And really what we've done is we've tried to take a look at some of the things that have come out of the latest tax bill and recognizing that there are things that we in the church need to be aware of. And so brought with me today my good friend Tim Dietrich, and part of our team here at Mortarstone. And Tim's going to talk to us a little bit about the opportunities that the 200 plus pages of tax bill creates for us, but also just things that we should be taking advantage of. And as we go, recognize that the chat is open as well as Q&A, and we really would love to get your questions into the conversation. Let me just say this. Tim wrote a blog about this topic, and as I read it, I realized I needed a lot of help in it, understanding it. And so that's part of the reason why Tim and I are here. My job is to help Tim put it on the lowest possible shelf for all of us to understand some core stuff. So Tim, I'm going to let you introduce yourself real quick and look forward to the dialogue.
Thanks, Dwayne. Hello, everybody from San Antonio, Texas. It's good to have you here. And as always, we're honored to have you join our webinars. Today, we do want to talk about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. As you recall, on July the 4th, President Trump signed this legislation into law. The bill in total is about 900 pages long. But within that, we see four really distinct opportunities for churches to message around and target segment their givers with some of the opportunities that are created within the bill. Now, I want to begin, Dwayne, by just letting everybody know that I am not a tax attorney. I'm not a CPA. And so as you view the webinar, you're going to have a lot of questions. There are going to be some things that are going to feel like, wow, I don't even know what that means. And that's okay. We didn't go to seminary or college to learn to become tax professionals. So we acknowledge that. But we do want to encourage you to lean into your own professional advisors that you have in your local church. You're going to have CPAs that are going to be up to speed on this. You're going to have maybe a tax attorney or an estate attorney that is going to be up to speed on this. And we really think that it would be important for you to really lean into those experts and talk to them about some of the implications of the One Big Beautiful Bill. So Dwayne, the first opportunity we see is the opportunity for
and Tim, even before you go there, let's ask a question of our audience.
Okay.
So question for everybody is, what percentage of your congregation will be impacted by the One Big Beautiful Bill? So we'll give it a moment.
All right, thanks everybody for participating. And as soon as those results become available, Dwayne, let's share them. So anyway, let's talk about the first opportunity that we see in the Big Beautiful Bill. One of the things that is important for us to know as church leaders.
Hey, Tim, hang on just a second here. We've got the poll results. And what we can see is, well, I think everyone can see them here, is the fact that it looks like most people think 75 to 100% of our people are impacted by this. 30% aren't sure. And anywhere between 75 and all the way down to less than 25. So Tim, it looks like there's a wide variety of that. So I think as we walk through this conversation, it'll be great to help people understand that actually there's probably not anyone who's not impacted or has an opportunity to change their giving as a result of the One Big Beautiful Bill. So Tim, back to you. Let's talk about the top, the 10% who itemize.
According to the IRS in 2024, 10% of Americans who filed itemized. The other 90% took the standard deduction. And we're going to get to that 90% in just a moment. But here are some of the highlights for those who do itemize. First of all, it caps the tax benefit at 35 cents for each dollar of itemized deductions. Now, this is a change from 37 cents in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2018. So that's one of the nuances that we're seeing here. The second thing it does is
So Tim, what that then says is that those who itemize can itemize or can deduct less
that is correct.
than what was there before.
That is correct.
Okay.
The second interesting thing, Dwayne, is that the bill creates a 1.5% floor on charitable deductions for itemizers. Uh, those deductions are based on adjusted gross income. So if you make, for example, your adjusted gross income is $100,000, then the first $500 you contribute would be ineligible to be deducted. So that's a little bit of an interesting twist on this, Dwayne, to create not just a lower ceiling, but raising the floor simultaneously for those who itemize. It also makes permanent the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act increased contribution limit of 60% of adjusted gross income for cash gifts. Now, this is cash gifts, not all asset gifts, but just cash gifts. You can deduct up to 60% of that, and there's a 5-year carry forward. So if my adjusted gross income is $100,000, and if I give my church $60,000 in cash, or I give my church $80,000 in cash, I can only deduct 60,000 of it, but the other 20,000 I can carry into the next tax year. So that's something that came with TJCA, and it has been made permanent. So as we think about this, Dwayne, I think there's some action steps we certainly want to dive into. And I think this is a great opportunity, if you do have questions, to go ahead and put those in the chat. But the main action step, Dwayne, is to communicate creative opportunities available to these givers, excuse me, and encourage them to make gifts from non-cash assets versus gifts from income. It's important that we distinguish gifts from income from gifts of wealth, because only about 3 to 5%, Dwayne, of what we actually steward is in our checkbooks today. The other 95 to 97% of what we steward is in our real estate, our residences. Maybe we have a business interest, a retirement account, a pension, whatever it is. That's where the assets mostly lie. And typically, the more a person earns, the less their income is a percentage of total net worth. So, Dwayne, what would be some ideas that we could use to communicate the importance of giving from assets instead of just stroking a check or setting up a recurring gift?
Tim, as always, great questions. And, it really just comes down to the fact of as recognizing how our assets grow, we have a basis, and as being able to talk about the fact that by reducing what your assets, the floor of your assets, I guess the basis points of your assets, really creates the opportunity for you to lean into a broader conversation about why giving from assets matters way more than in giving from cash, because cash is always going to be something that flows through cash flow, but really it's the assets that allow us to actually engage and think differently about what giving looks like, because you can actually reduce your long-term capital gains by addressing that as you go as well.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I think, Dwayne, that distinguishes not-for-profit philanthropies such as colleges, universities, hospitals from the local church. The church is very good, as Russell James would say, at getting small gifts. But the church is not very good at getting major gifts And universities are getting those, hospitals are getting those because they focus on gifts from non-cash assets. Now, when we talk about non-cash assets, we're talking about things like publicly traded stock, privately held stock, real estate, money market accounts, cryptocurrency. There's 12 or 13 different kinds of assets that people may have access to that are going to be challenging for the givers if they were to liquidate them. So when we think about taxes, normally we think, well, tax deductions are the big thing. But the conversation, because of one big beautiful bill, has shifted from thinking about tax deductions into tax avoidance. And tax avoidance is important to your givers because they have increasingly growing capital gain just due to appreciation. Dwayne, you're right. When we get older, our wealth does not move kind of in this up and to the right pattern. Actually, as we get older and mature, those assets look more like a hockey stick.
Yeah.
So the growth curve on our net worth goes almost straight up and down. And it's going to grow faster in your 70s than it did in your 60s. It's going to grow faster in your 80s than it is in your 70s. And so these are concepts that are not complicated, but I think it's important that church leaders learn how to at least become conversant in suggesting those kinds of gifts and making them available. We look, Dwayne, at a lot of church giving pages, and most giving pages that we look at are just simply a link to a payment processor. A very few might mention stocks, and a very few may add crypto to that, but nobody's really just addressing wholeheartedly the vast opportunities that are before givers as they try to solve these problems. And Dwayne, what we find is the churches need to really assume some responsibility in this because the most dangerous assumption we can make is that wealth managers and CPAs are going to suggest these kinds of gifts. They're
And
not.
Tim, that's one of the questions that somebody asked is, shouldn't these types of suggestions come from individuals' financial advisor rather than the church? And I think you just addressed one of the big things out there is that there is no wealth manager who is, well, there are some who are Christian based and they're trying to think through how does someone live a generous life. But most tax and financial advisors are not compensated based upon helping people figure out how to live generous lives. And so there's a lot of our people in our pews in our seats who have never had someone encourage them to think differently about giving other than just cash flow based gifts.
And one of the other assumptions that's dangerous to make, Dwayne, is that givers will just figure all this out on their own. So I think it is important as a part of holistic discipleship that we talk about people's wealth um, according to where they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not everybody is going to be um, um, just taking the standard deduction. And what we saw in last year's annual generosity report, Dwayne, was that the top 1% of givers give 21.2% of all the money.
Yeah.
So this again is another reason why we need to help our top givers because they're already proven that they're generous, and for those who are underperforming, if you will, they're not giving to according to their capacity. It also becomes an opportunity for us to say, oh, hey, by the way, did you know? That you can give appreciated stock? Did you know? And I think those are the kinds of things that then they can go to their tax professional or their wealth manager and start to figure out how to do that.
And Tim, I know I've shared this before, but when I used to work in the corporate world, I had a chunk of my income was based on equity. And multiple years, I converted equity into cash and gave to the church. And no one from the church knew enough to come talk to me about how to actually give more to the church as a result of not giving as much to the IRS. And that's part of my heartbeat behind this conversation, as well as I know my own personal journey would have looked differently if I had the opportunity for someone to instruct me on the way.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Dwayne, we've kind of covered the top 10%. Let's look at the 90% of Americans who take the standard deduction. Again, this is going to be most of the people in the pew. And one of the things that we need to be aware of is that standard deduction for individuals and joint filers is going to go up in 2025. That's not 2026. These are this year's numbers. And what the bill says is that going forward after 2025, that deduction is going to be adjusted for inflation. So year by year, we're going to anticipate that standard deduction becomes greater and greater. But it also, not only has it made permanent that standard deduction from the 2018 legislation, Dwayne, it creates a permanent deduction for taxpayers who do not itemize, capped at $1,000 or $2,000 for joint filers. So they are trying to incentivize, to some degree, people's giving. They're trying to incentivize, even though you're going to take the standard deduction, they don't want to see that as an excuse for people to not give or reduce their giving. So they are incentivizing givers at least this much to be able to help them stay committed to their not-for-profits, their charities, and their churches. So this is going to be very helpful, I think. So Dwayne,
Tim, if this represents 90% of the people, this is the majority of the people sitting in our seats. How do we, from a tax perspective, if you're married, you can deduct $2,000 of your giving. How do we encourage, motivate, challenge, teach to help people to give sacrificially and not think through, well, I'm not getting a tax advantage piece. What do I do in those conversations?
Well, one of the action steps, obviously, Dwayne, is that we've got to make sure that we are talking about the intrinsic motivations to give. When I was younger, there was always kind of this thing, and you even hear not-for-profits say it today, or you see it on television commercials, your gift is tax deductible, that kind of thing. But really, we have to sit down and focus on intrinsic, spiritual, faith-based motivations to be generous and to give. And those can be grounded in impact stories. Those impact stories are significant to your people. And there's two ways we can do the impact stories. If you're a baby boomer, you want to hear, this year we had 2,000 kids in our vacation Bible school, and we sent 5 mission teams to foreign countries, and they saw 150 professions of faith. Boomers like those aggregate numbers, but the younger generations, millennials and Zoomers, they want those one-on-one stories. This is why Compassion International is so popular with the younger generation. They can't tell you how many people are being fed through Compassion International because they've got a picture on their refrigerator. And that's their story. That's what motivates them. So as we think about our offering moments, as we think about sermon series, as we think about our annual report, as we think about our giving page on whatever it is, we need to make sure that we are leading with impact. We are making a difference. We are solving problems both locally and globally, and those stories will really be beneficial, Dwayne.
That's great. So that's number one. Tim, the second one is the gift bunching through donor advised funds. Talk about that one for a minute, and then I've got a follow-up question when you're done with this, just to add some flavor.
Okay. I think well, I don't think I know the hottest philanthropic giving tool in America today is the Donor Advised Fund. These are becoming very, very widespread. Our friend Ted Hart shared that in 2024, about $58 billion were granted from donor advised funds, Dwayne. And I wonder how much of that $58 billion actually made its way into the church. Their not-for-profits are very, very good at seeking grants from donor advised funds. So let me, at the risk of being verbose here, Dwayne, let me take a minute and just kind of explain how a donor advised fund works, because I don't want to assume that everybody knows. But donor advised funds are kind of like a everyday guy, every man's private foundation. Okay, it's a charitable giving account. So when I put money or securities or a non-cash asset into a donor advised fund, that creates the deduction for the calendar year. Then from that fund, I can make grants to any charity that's on the IRS publication 78 to be able to help them with their mission. Now, the caveat that a lot of people don't catch on donor advised funds is when you put money in a donor advised fund, you no longer control or own the money. That's why it's called an advised fund. So if I have $100,000 in my donor advised fund, Dwayne, and it's with one of the big three, uh, I can say I want to make a grant to fill in the blank not for profit or religious not for profit, and they can deny that request. Okay, so that's just one of the things that people need to know. As the money sits in that donor advised fund, it then begins to earn interest. So it increases the value of your gift because in the fund it is invested for some type of growth. Gifts from donor advised funds are also anonymous. And they're also, so that's why church leaders are frustrated. They get this check from Fidelity or Vanguard or Schwab or whoever, and they're like, we don't know who made this gift. And how do we find out? And the answer is you don't. Because if the donor advised fund is protected that way, unless the donor or the giver voluntarily discloses the gift. So those are some things about donor advised funds. And the reason they've gained in popularity, Dwayne, is because of the increased tax deduction. And this has created a strategy or made more common a strategy known as gift bunching. So say you and your wife, Dwayne, have a standard deduction of $31,000 and you don't have enough to itemize. It is possible for you to take, for example, appreciated stock and put it in a donor advised fund. You get the deduction for this year, which allows you to itemize your taxes, but you don't have to give the money this year. So if you give, say, for example, $10,000 a year to your church, you can put the money, the 20,000 in the donor advised fund this year and then get the deduction. And then this year you can give 10, next year you can give 10, and perhaps next year then you take the standard deduction. So this gift bunching kind of creates this rhythm of leapfrogging where I itemize, take the standard deduction, I itemize, I take the standard deduction, and it's become a really popular tax strategy for people who are just right there on the cusp of wanting to itemize, but they're just not able to.
Yep. And Tim, you talked about the fact that I think 58 billion was paid out or granted from donor advised funds. Do you have an idea how much was put into donor advised funds last year?
I do not, but it was exponentially more than that.
And that's
So
what that's at least the research that I've seen is that the amount of money sitting in donor advised funds is great, which leads to the question of if you're a church leader, Tim, how do you know or how do you actually engage to figure out who might have a donor advised fund that you could actually ask for a grant from?
Well, one of the things I always recommend to churches that when they think about their ways to give on their giving page, that they include something alongside, um, stocks and crypto or whatever. They include something about make a grant from your donor advised fund. Okay, just letting the church, just letting your givers know that that is that's an option for them. As you meet one-on-one with your givers, they may even disclose that they have a donor advised fund. But otherwise, it's just going to be this air war of making this big shotgun appeal because, again, you don't know who has those funds unless they voluntarily self disclose.
Yep. Okay. Thanks. And talk about IRAs for a minute, but before you do that, actually, somebody asked us to confirm that based upon what we said on the previous page, Tim, that whatever that this $2,000 actually is on top of what the standard deduction is, right? So if
That's
you're
correct.
married, you actually have a deduction possible of $33,500 instead of the standard deduction that you cannot take any. So yes, that is a true statement.
Yeah. And again, we want to encourage you guys to talk to your CPAs and your wealth managers within your church. It's a great way to help you think through how to have these conversations with the givers that are in your church. And you might be surprised at some of the input and the help that they're able to offer.
Yep.
80% of Americans, Dwayne, have an individual retirement account.
What?
And
You said 80%?
80%.
Okay.
So as we see baby boomers turn 70, okay, they've got several challenges. One is a lot of times their home is paid for. So if they don't have mortgage interest to deduct, then they're going to have a challenge with figuring out how to itemize. So emphasizing a deduction for them may not be the most effective thing. But when people turn 70 and a half years old, they are then able to give what is called a qualified charitable deduction from their IRA. It does not give them a deduction, or excuse me, a qualified charitable distribution. It does not give them the tax deduction, but it helps them avoid the income tax on the money that comes from their IRA. When you turn 73, you're required to take what is called a required minimum distribution or an RMD. Again, you have to take it. If you don't take it, you're going to be severely penalized. So one of the first strategies I learned in my last place of service 6, 7 years ago, Dwayne, was challenging givers to think through assigning their RMD directly to the church. They didn't get the deduction, but they avoided all of the income tax on it. And those IRAs are going to be taxed at your tax rate. It's not fixed. So if your tax rate continues to go up and up and up and up, adding that additional income just continues to feed the monster, if you will. And so that's one of the reasons why it's very popular among people who are 70 and a half and older. It gives them a great opportunity to do that. The other thing it does, and this isn't really, this is just something everybody needs to know, is it's a great way to rethink how givers distribute their wealth when they die and how they pass it on to their kids. So if I have $100,000, Dwayne, in my IRA, and if I have two kids, my kids aren't going to get 500,000 apiece. They're going to get half of $100,000 after my taxable rate. So this is something that givers are starting to think through. If I do my giving from my IRA, or if I leave my IRA to my kids, it's going to be severely impacted by income tax. But if I leave them life insurance or a certificate of deposit, they don't pay any tax on that. So we're seeing a lot of churches really lean into their 70 plus crowd to try to help them think through how to give more efficiently and effectively from their IRA. So it creates a tremendous win-win.
So Tim, one of the questions that was asked was, did the bill actually affect the required beginning dates for RMDs or anything along those lines like the previous acts did?
Now, IRA, the Secure Act 2.0 was signed by President Biden in around Christmas of 2023. And I did look. It's still 70 and a half and 73 for the ages. And the qualified charitable distribution for 2025 is $108,000. So when I turn 70 and a half, I can give up to $108,000 from my IRA and avoid the income tax on it. So we're seeing a few seniors who have IRAs. Their church is in a capital campaign and they're fulfilling their pledge from IRA QCDs. They're avoiding the income tax on it, and they're also leveraging that for their heirs.
Okay. So Tim, a couple questions that have come in. I assume loading a DAF with securities would not be a cash gift that counts against the 60% of income cap for tax deductions.
That is correct.
Okay.
But they would avoid the appreciation on the capital gain. Or
Okay.
the capital gain on the appreciation.
Yep. And then there's another another statement that came in, and DAFs are not helpful for the beneficiaries of the 90%. There is no tax advantage. There is the potential of the gift coming anonymously, and at no time has the distribution come anywhere close to the donation amount. So money is sitting in accounts and not being used for the kingdom. DAFs are not going away. I appreciate we need to understand them, but I would not be endorsing them as strategy for the 90%. What's your thoughts on that?
Obviously, that's the number one criticism of donor advised funds is that people put money in them and then they become all of a sudden reluctant to make grants from them. So, in conversations I've had with Ted Hart, who's getting ready to release a book called The DAF Revolution, um, Ted Ted says that the way people think about donor advised funds is that the tax problem is separate from the giving problem. In other words, some people are like, I need a tax solution, but I don't know where to give my money. Now, this is not for profit secular philanthropy, right? They have this tax problem they solve through a DAF, but they're not quite sure how to give or where they want to give it. They're going to research that as two separate internal conversations. So again, I hear the criticism, and the thing that if I'm going to give $10,000 to my church, why don't I just give $10,000 to the church and be done with it? That's a very valid concern. But we also have to remember that not everybody strictly supports their church as their only charity. Um, they say that the givers in our church who are generous support up to 5 different charities, and their favorite charity gets 65% of their philanthropic dollar. So while we're thinking of a one-to-one relationship with the giver, where it makes total sense to do that, the giver is not just thinking about my church or your church, Dwayne. They're thinking about other things that they care about and other causes that they want to support. So I don't know if that answers the question, Dwayne. I think the question is very valid. Why are we seeing these things pile up? In fact, the IRS is examining that. There's no requirement for me to ever grant a dollar from my donor advised fund. And so the IRS is considering making it a 5% rule, kind of like a private or a family foundation would be required to grant 5% of its total year after year after year. So
I think, Tim, I think there's a couple of things, and the person who put that in there said that they're not going away. I mean, let's recognize they're not going away. Second thing is the fact of actually part of what we're trying to say here is the fact of get wise about how you engage people about giving from DAFs, because the best way to get the money into the kingdom is by asking people to actually engage it in the kingdom. And so most of us have people in our churches. I lead in a church. Most of everyone here leads in a church. The challenge is the fact that we've got people with DAF sitting out there that we don't know about, but yet are not engaging that money in the kingdom. And so it's up to us to figure out how to ask and engage more wisely in that so that they are motivated to move money from a DAF into the kingdom work. And so that's, I think, what we're really trying to drive to, Tim, in this conversation, if I'm
Right,
not.
exactly, 100%, Dwayne. And I think that, again, talking about the intrinsic motivation of impact,
Yep.
we have to always be talking about impact.
Yep. So Tim, I think we've got another poll. How many grants does your church receive each year from donor advised funds? So if we could get that poll up there, and then let's just give it a moment. Great conversation on DAFs, and it is one of those things where, Tim, as you said, I mean, whether or not someone has an IRA, whether or not they have a DAF, there's just a lot of different ways that we can impact and help engage people, but it's all going to come down to that intrinsic thing. It's not going to be based upon any tax code. It's all going to be based upon how we teach and
Mhm.
address attaching the heart and the pocketbook to the mission of God. And so that's on each of us. So
Well,
can we get
Dwayne,
the results of the poll real quick?
oh yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Tim. All right.
Wow, I'm more than 10 is 38%. That's very interesting to me.
Yeah.
So again, to the point, they're not going away. So thinking through, if I know I'm getting 10 or more donor advised fund grants every year, how am I going to build relationships with those, or how am I going to message that, or be able to have a more personalized connection with them. I've had one church leader, Dwayne, say that they were frustrated because they just wanted to thank the giver and they weren't able to thank the giver. So there's a lot of things there to consider.
Yep. So
So,
Tim, let's go on to who are some of the other people? Um,
well, there's going to be people opportunity for those who benefit from taxable income adjustments. And if you go to the blog post at mortarstone.com, Dwayne, you'll see a lot of the detail around these things. But the main thing that we want to see is number one, no tax on tips. Dwayne, I don't know if any of your kids ever worked in the food industry, waited tables, got tips and stuff like that. I had two of my kids who had done that. With us being more and more of a cashless society, restaurants are required to report those tips because they come in electronically, right? So that tax on tips has been eliminated, which is really going to be helpful to perhaps even younger generations. Also, there's no tax on overtime. That has been eliminated. If you have uh, again, the detail on the limitations and so forth are in the blog post. And then the third one is an added deduction for those who are age 65 and older. They're going to get an opportunity to deduct an additional $6,000 because they're older. And if they're married, they can deduct up to 12,000. Now that deduction is phased out for single taxpayers who have an adjusted gross income of 75,000. That'd be $150,000 for a couple. So that $6,000 deduction works for those over the age of 65 up to an adjusted gross income of $75,000.
That's so there. So basically, what you're saying, Tim, is there's going to be people that come in every Sunday who into our churches who actually probably have more available dollars than what they had before based upon these deductions and not being taxed on these things. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And the number one challenge, especially with the younger generations, is how do we create more discretionary income? Discretionary income's the big challenge, right? So there's a couple of things, Dwayne, I think in terms of taking action on this that we ought to consider. And number one is, I think first and foremost, if they're going to have a little bit of discretionary income, this is an opportunity for the church to lean into financial literacy education, especially for the younger generations, helping them develop financial literacy so that they can improve their financial health, budget, manage their money, focus on debt retirement, whether it's student loan debt or personal debt, create savings or even financial planning for retirement. This, the opportunity to have a little bit of discretionary income could be potentially an incentive for people to say, yeah, I think I need to get my financial house in order.
So Tim, are these tax breaks effective immediately or in 2026?
These are going to be effective in 2026, I
Okay.
believe.
Okay. And because I think what the big thing that we're trying to say here is we all have people in our churches who now have potentially more discretionary income than they had before. And if all they do is they start to spend it the way that they used to, if they're already living above margin or without margin, then they're just only going to potentially get deeper into challenges. And so now's the time to start talking about, hey, if this is you and you now have the potential of additional margin, let's help you figure out how to actually use that margin to accomplish the broader conversations that need to take place.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of churches creating a giving progression, if you will. We have people who don't give anything. What is it, Dwayne? Like 39% of people in our databases never give anything.
I think it's 41% don't give, 59% are givers, and the majority of them are the small givers.
Okay, so we know that we have a substantial portion of our church members who do not give anything. We also learned in our 2024 annual generosity report that only one out of every 20 attendees on an average Sunday tithe. So our tithing numbers are 5%. So when we start to think about it, there's a lot of opportunity for people to take one step forward. If I'm not giving, I can make that first gift. If I've made a first gift, make a second gift. If I make a second gift, maybe I can give regularly. And from regular giving, I might become a recurring giver, or I might become a percentage giver, all the way up to tithing. And so I think just trying to figure out how do we help people get there at the pace that they can run, instead of just setting this gold standard of the tithe is 10%, take it or leave it. You're either obedient or you're not. Well, that messaging, obviously, Dwayne, is not working.
Right. Yep. So Tim, we've talked about the 90%, the 10%, another group of people within those numbers, but then there's another group of people that we need to talk about as well. You want to tackle the opportunity for the high net worth givers?
Yeah, I'll be pretty brief here, Dwayne. I think that it's important that we do acknowledge that within our churches we have high net worth givers, and high net worth is defined as those who have a net worth of $30 billion or more. Ultra high net worth people are people with 100 million or more. So that's kind of how the stratification works, at least in philanthropic circles. So in 2025, the exemption for estate taxes was um, almost 14 million for single filers or 28 million for those who filed jointly. In 2026, those numbers are going to go up to 15 and 30 respectively. Okay. So while a lot of people are worried about tax avoidance, they're worried about tax deductions, there's a few people out there who are also worried about estate taxes. They're concerned about that. And what the delay in the one big beautiful bill created was a hesitancy among high net worth people to do any kind of estate planning because they didn't know which way the law was going to shift. So now that one big beautiful bill has been enacted, now we are philanthropy experts are saying that we're seeing those high net worth people begin to re-engage with estate planning for estate tax purposes because they feel some sense of permanence around the law. So this is something that we can acknowledge. Every church should have some kind of strategy for end of life gifts, Dwayne, wills, trusts, including the church. The last statistic I saw was that 65% of Americans did not have a will. And of the 35% that did, only 10% of those had a charitable component of any kind. So when we think about this, there's great opportunity among all of our people, not just our high net worth people, but a tremendous opportunity to encourage and engage people in estate design, estate planning, and inclusion of the church in the will. Dwayne, I've been working at Morrisstone for nearly 5 years, and I've talked to hundreds of givers in all four time zones. And I've never had a giver say, yeah, I'm not interested in leaving the church in my estate. Not one time. And I think the number one reason that people aren't including the church in their estate plans is just simple as no one has asked them. They haven't been challenged. And so I think that this is going to be, again, more broad than your high net worth people, but it's something that I think is a great opportunity for all of our congregation, especially those who are over the age of 50. Um, so if we can help them think about their long-term planned giving strategies, and if we can help them think through the ability to assign the church as a beneficiary of a toxic asset such as an IRA, I think that would be a tremendous opportunity to minister and serve our people.
That's good. So, Tim, and I'll just say there's chat going on and there's some questions out here that, but folks, if you have more, would love to see them. I know one of the things that just someone just posted here, and there's some people on here who probably have a lot more of the depths of some of the tax code than what we're trying to address in here. But one of the comments here is that beginning the 2025 tax year, there's a federal income tax deduction of up to 25,000 for qualifying tips, but they're still subject to Social Security and Medicare taxes.
Yeah,
So
and again, Dwayne, this is why at the beginning of the webinar we said, hey, you need to make sure that you are spending time with your internal tax professionals in your local churches because our intent was not to be exhaustive here. Our intent was to say, hey, this is something that everyone in America to some degree has talked about in 2025.
yeah.
You say one big beautiful bill, there's going to be hardly anyone that doesn't know something about the big legislation. And to be able to extract from that just opportunities for our churches to consider how they can communicate more effectively with their givers, I think is really important.
So Tim, I think that's key. And so one of the questions that I think always comes up in conversations that I'm a part of talking to churches is how do we start to segment communications? What is segmented conversations? Because each of these groupings, the opportunities with these groupings is different. What's that look like?
I think, you know, I think it's, first of all, I think it's important that we have a thorough basis where we are beginning to normalize the conversation. By normalizing the conversation, I mean, does your pastor do an annual generosity series? Do you have regular offering moments during worship, during weekend worship? What does your giving page look like? Does your giving page reflect some of the different opportunities that are there? Your email communication, even how you share end of year contribution statements. I mean, these are all great ways to help message. But when we get into targeting, there's target segmenting. There's two ways we can do that. One, we can do it generationally. If I know who in my church is 70 years old, then I know that I've got a great opportunity to begin to talk to them about giving from their IRA. If I've got some Gen Xers in my church that are really doing well in their careers, those are great people to talk to about giving appreciated securities. If I've got younger generations, I would do everything that I could to create a financial literacy program that's not church wide, but is really targeted toward millennials and Gen Z because they think so much differently about money than their parents and their grandparents. So I was talking to a millennial just last Friday, Dwayne, and I asked her how she would define the word legacy. And she talked about everything except money. And she thinks about her own personal legacy, the concept of, oh yes, leaving a financial legacy, that doesn't even register. Okay, so I think that there's ways that we can go about it in terms of trying to just understand where people are at. With Mortarstone, we can obviously do deeper dives and get some kind of idea about median household income. We can get an idea about median residential values based on U.S. Census block data. So Dwayne, and also we can define generations as well as age grouping through Mortistone software. And I assume most everybody on the call has some experience with Mortistone. And if you're on the call, and if I just said 5 or 6 things that you're not familiar with, reach out. We'd love to sit down and show you how you can begin to understand your giving composition, and then how you can then move forward into having those conversations and segmenting your messaging.
So, and Tim, there's a couple of people that said, how do you convince congregants to provide their birthday in the church database?
Well, that's the $64 question, isn't it, Dwayne? Every year we look at this when we do our annual generosity report, and of the people that we track in Mortarstone, in the aggregate, 55% do not have a clean date of birth.
Yeah.
And Dwayne, I've seen have talked with some churches who have said, yeah, we're just gonna pass out a 3x5 card on Sunday morning and say, please write your name and date of birth down if you're comfortable, or at least a birth year. And if you can find that birth year, you can just assign them January 1, which is what we recommend, so that okay, we don't have their month and day, but we are pretty confident in this. So those are pretty difficult things. If you have people register for anything, I would encourage them to include a request for a date of birth. What have you seen some churches do, Dwayne?
Tim, much of what you've talked about, and I know this is a big challenge across because people don't want people to know age or whatever the case is, and it really just comes down to back to the giving conversation that you had, Tim. What's the intrinsic value associated with knowing people's age so that we can actually minister to them and help and ask them to minister to others more effectively? And so I think that's part of the conversation that we have to do, is help people understand that actually knowing information about them is actually useful to us, but also helps them engage across the body more effectively. And so those are some of the things. And I know we're almost out of time. Tim, this has been really helpful. I'm just going to say real quick, we want to just ask the same question we had at the beginning here, and somewhat a trick question, but what percentage of your congregation will be impacted by the one big beautiful bill? And let's just give that a moment. But Tim, um, there's let's see if there's another question here. Um, yeah, someone commented about the fact of when you're doing background checks, you can gather some information that way through community groups, engagement. So there's a ton of different ways that can take place. So I'll just say on this poll, really what we hope everyone picked up is the fact that there's actually information in this bill and impact in this bill for every single person in your church. So, so understanding that there are things that will impact each person in their giving and how you engage them is a part of that conversation. But everyone has some level of impact, whether or not, like you said, Tim, the top 10% actually, their ability to deduct actually has dropped, and the 90% is there as well. So, our goal is to help people think through and work through these. And so actually, let me just say, we've got some upcoming roundtables that we want to do that talks about this conversation, extending this conversation about giving year end. How do you plan for year end? And Tim, I think we've got some resources going to be available soon, right?
Yes, we are putting the finishing touches on our third annual end of year giving guide. There's a user guide for church leaders, but there's also a resource for your givers, which is a great way to help them think through
Pleasure.
giving from non-cash assets. And the reason we're doing this and talking about this in August is that if you give from assets, it takes time for those gifts to be facilitated. So, for example, if Dwayne wanted to make a gift from his money market account to his church, that could take 5 or 6 weeks. So, we want to make sure that we are getting this to you so that in September you can begin developing an end of year giving strategy so that you can actually launch the end of year strategy in October and hopefully no later than November 1. Because people think differently about giving from assets. It's a different kind of thought process. But one of the things that we're encouraged by is when I look at my checkbook, I give what I can. But when I look at my entire net worth and balance sheet, I can then give what I want. And this is why this is such an important, valuable conversation for our givers. We move them from giving what they can to giving what they want, and the kingdom benefits greatly.
Thanks, Tim. And I know we're out of time, but folks, thank you guys for joining us. If you want more information, follow us on LinkedIn because we're constantly keeping information up there, and we're going to be we've got some additional blogs that we're working on as well that we'll be communicating out. But we'd love to have you join us at a roundtable or two so that we can talk through some of the key issues that you're facing and engage with other people, like-minded people in those conversations. So with that, I'm just going to say have a great rest of August. We're almost at the end of the month, but I know it's back to school, back to church, back to a lot of different things. And so appreciate the opportunity and look forward to the next conversation. Thanks, everybody.